As April becomes May 1940, there is an important meeting at the palace where the English king, where the British king is. Two men are going to come to visit him and have lunch with him, a lunch meeting. One of them is tall and razor thin. His name is Lord Halifax, and he was Neville Chamberlain's foreign minister. He was Neville Chamberlain's right-hand man in the appeasement of Germany before the war. He is widely respected in the English and British establishments. The king knows him personally. He knows the various Nazi leaders personally because he's done business with all of them. And he is the safe bet to become the next prime minister now that Neville Chamberlain has been forced to finally resign. The other couldn't be more opposite, physically and in terms of his background. Winston Churchill is short, he's fat, he's bald, and he's trouble. Churchill has always had an excess of exuberance, and this exuberance has made him a dynamic politician. It has made him unpredictable to his enemies, but he's indomitable. That means you can't dominate him. Churchill's career is characterized by bold moves, gutsy moves. And because he's so unpredictable and so bellicose, the king and others in the establishment don't trust him. They also blame him, wrongly, I think, for the disaster at Gallipoli in World War I, where the British try landing troops and attacking Turkish Constantinople, which turned out to be a debacle. So, who is going to be the next prime minister? Now, everyone also knows that Churchill is absolutely courteous towards the monarch. In fact, Churchill gave up a chance at power 3 years before in order to be personally loyal to the previous British monarch, who ended up having to resign because he wanted to marry an American divorcee. That king, Edward VIII, was a Nazi sympathizer, and the world really dodged a bullet when he was forced to resign to marry the woman he loved, the many times married Mrs. Simpson. But Churchill stood by his king because loyal fellow. Well, everyone knows how deferential Churchill is. So what Churchill's friends in Parliament, who really want a wartime leader, begged Churchill to promise is, if the king looks over and says, would anyone mind if Lord Halifax took over the premiership? Churchill's natural deferential instinct to royalty is to say, if that's who you want, Your Majesty, of course I'll serve under Lord Halifax. And that would be it. Churchill would be not prime minister. So Churchill's allies in Parliament succeed at begging him not to say anything. If you can't bring yourself to say no to the king, okay, but at least be silent, because silence could be interpreted a variety of ways, including, I'm not going to serve under Halifax, which would be bad. Britain needs unity, so they pick Churchill. Well, wouldn't you know it, King George VI, who took over after Edward VIII, looks Churchill in the eye after they've had their pleasantries and says, do you think anyone would object if we picked Lord Halifax here? Would anyone object if Lord Halifax were to become prime minister? And they waited. And Churchill says nothing. And then after a pregnant silence, Halifax says, well, I really don't feel I'm up to it, and I also don't think that the country wants to be under a lord. We want to have a commoner, so I'd be happy to serve under Winston Churchill, and the decision is made to make Churchill prime minister. So there's a close-run thing, and we'll see why fairly soon. Churchill isn't prime minister for 3 days before the Western Front finally erupts. There are German attacks along the entire Dutch frontier, the Belgian frontier, Luxembourg, and even along the Maginot Line. At this point, early on, nobody knows where the real weight is going to fall, but the likelihood is that it's another Schlieffen plan. So the plan to move the Anglo-French forces up to the Deal line is activated, and basically what the British expect is the Germans are going to sweep south, and the British and French are going to sweep north, and they're going to meet and form a trench line in central Belgium and Holland. It's a terrible thing to be in a war and be trapped by the concept of the last war you fought. And unfortunately, that is endemic of Allied planning at this time. Because Hitler is not fighting a World War I style battle, and he is not doing a Schlieffen plan. Through his intelligence network, he is very well aware of the Anglo-French plan to move up, and he's counting on it. He's counting on the best armies in mobile warfare that the Allies have, moving up into this area here of the Low Countries. Because Hitler's plan is very different. What Hitler is going to do is he's going to avoid the Maginot Line. So in that sense, the Maginot Line works. Hitler is deterred from going through it. Instead, what he is going to do is he is going to punch his army through southwest eastern Belgium towards the French city of Metz and through a forest in Belgium called the Ardennes, a forested hilly region that nobody from pre-war planning days think tanks can move through easily. It's too rough, there are too few good roads, it's going to be muddy and lousy. But Hitler is not deterred. He orders his primary attack through the Ardennes. And before anyone realizes it, the German blitzkrieg has reached here. The British and French armies are here, or they're trapped in fortifications, and the Germans are actually behind the Anglo-French lines. Now, everyone expects that he's going to go for Paris, just like they tried for in World War I. But again, Hitler and Guderian and the German Panzer Blitzkrieg, Panzers are German tanks, by the way. Panzers are German tanks. The Germans surprised them. Instead of going after Paris, what the Germans do is they march north. Actually, they drive north really, really fast to cut off the best units in the Franco-British Army and trap them to destroy them in a great encircling action. German troops reached the Channel coast near Ypres. Now something happens that historians have debated about. Hitler's forces have beaten everything that the French threw at them. Now, the French actually had some very heavy tanks that the Germans could not have faced head on. Armor's too thick, but they're slow. And what the French did is they dispersed all of their tanks amongst their infantry units to support foot soldiers, thinking that everything was going to be the open-handed attacks of trench warfare. Germany concentrates its tanks into panzer divisions, armored divisions, with mechanized forces, panzer grenadiers behind them. And this allows the Germans to slice through the French lines at a pace of warfare that the French are completely unprepared for, and the British are completely unprepared for. When this breakthrough takes place, the French begin to panic. There's a call from the French Prime Minister or the French Premier to the British Prime Minister. Churchill takes it in bed, and he assures the French Premier that Corporal Hitler will not do in several weeks what Kaiser Wilhelm was incapable of doing in 4.5 years, which is conquer France. That this looks bad, but it's not as bad as it is. We shouldn't panic. Things will get better. Well, this is a case where Churchill's wrong. Things only get better for the Germans. And when the Germans reach the English Channel, it looks like these armies, the Anglo-French armies, are going to be destroyed, and then there's going to be nothing standing between the Germans and the rest of France. But the great what if is, orders come down that the panzer generals, Guderian and Rommel, cannot believe. Stop, halt, recover, replenish, hold your position. The most mobile army in the world at that point is ordered to stop, replenish, and hold its position. Now, some people think that Hitler, the old infantry soldier, was way too nervous about the flanks of these big, long arrows being attacked by the British and French and pinched off. In fact, the British and French tried an attack just like that, with General de Gaulle's French tanks to the south and British tanks to the north, but the French tanks don't arrive on time, and the British tanks attack, and it's not a pinch of two sides, it's just a push on one side, and the Germans destroy the British tanks. When the French tanks show up, it's too late, they don't fight much, it's a disaster. But Hitler's afraid of long supply lines, and he's afraid of too much success. Too much success has made him a little nervous. That's what some people say. So he ordered everything to halt. But there's something else. Hermann Goering, the World War I fighting ace who was injured during the beer hall putsch, has since become an elephantine man, a man of amazingly grotesque appetites. He is a drug addict. He's addicted to pain medication. He is in excess of 350, 400 pounds. He has these special uniforms made. He looks like this sort of colorful balloon. And he is the head, among other things, of Prussia, of the police in Germany, and of the Luftwaffe, of the German Air Force. Goering begs Hitler to stop the army so that the Air Force can win the battle. The Luftwaffe will bomb the Anglo-French forces into submission. And that is what Goering begs for. And it's entirely possible that Hitler wanted to give his friend and old comrade Goering an opportunity to shine like the Panzer generals had had. But there's a third prospect. That prospect has to do with diplomacy, which we will discuss next.